This is another reflection video of the games that I played at IndieCON in Rimini in Italy. And this one is Marks on the Skin. Now, I have spent lots of time talking with and playing games with and consulting for Edoardo Cremaschi. And this is another one of his many bubbling up out of the cauldron game designs. And I was a little wary. It's called Marks on the Skin, and I'm thinking, well, this is Edoardo, and are we actually going to be scathed personally? When we play this, you never know. Well, not quite, although there is scathing. Well, we sat down, and who was it? Edoardo, of course, and me, and Davida, and Manuela. So we got to play, and how does it work? Well, the touch point concept for this is a warrior. You're basically creating the biography of a warrior, and you begin with the idea is to make a map, and this map is the warrior's actual skin, the person's actual skin that you are mapping their life upon via assigning scars and tattoos. And they're assigned not necessarily in chronological order, and you use a black pen and a red pen. The system of turn taking, which is represented by the rules for passing the pens from hand to hand, which also dictates particular system roles. Not just I play my guy, you play every other guy. That actually is not what's going on. It's a little, I think, more sophisticated than that. What we see, really, though, here is a game that is very much an idea, a few scribbles, a couple of pages of purported system, and a deep need for human eyes, thoughts, and hands to touch it. Now, does that mean that it's being play tested? This is just something I'm hammering on. 2019 is the year of what you do first with your scribbly proto game thing, idea for a game. What do you do with it? And the first thing I'm saying is it's not called play testing. What you do with it then isn't play testing. You are not stress testing it. You are not breaking it. You are not product evaluating it. You're not pretending you're a chimpanzee and will it still work anyway, or any of these things. It is a completely different process. Well, that's where this game was. It's where I like games to be when I encounter them, and I thoroughly enjoyed the whole experience as its role in that process, as much as I enjoyed the actual game, which was a lot. And of course, where things seemed a little iffy or whatever, Edoardo said, well, let's keep going, and it was together enough, done enough, or if you want to call it done, it was together enough for us not to ever really stop and say, oh, wait, how does that work? Conceptually, there was a thing, which I'll talk about. All right, so for purposes of what we did that day, who knows how it will be eventually, but Edoardo had come with a bunch of silhouettes, and they are people in various, you can see them in the PDF, they're people in various postures, body types, and at the moment, because this is just checking it out, they're reasonably generic. I mean, one could talk about, well, why isn't there this or why isn't there that? But this is not the final product, and this is just for sufficient purposes of trying this stuff out. And a few are real straightforward. There's an athletic-looking man. There's a couple of other interesting, fairly Amazonian appearing type silhouettes, at least one gender ambiguous, and a couple of others. One clearly, a few are clearly wearing modern clothes. They're not just body silhouettes. Well, we were looking through them, and all of them could work. That was, I think, part of the thing. We were like, well, that could work. We could get warriors out of any of this. Very different warriors, which is part of the point, I suppose. And then we hit upon one, though, that was far more passive or retiring looking than the others, and was clearly wearing fairly traditional garments, a skirt, and the position of the arm. Now remember, this is just, you can see it, it's just this silhouette, but the position of the arm may well in the photograph have been a matter of holding a purse or a backpack or something like that. And yet when we looked at it, I kind of looked at it and said, it could be that this person is differently abled. We may have, something about this character that's quite a contrast to the otherwise kind of, really super normal look of the silhouette. And that's possible. Well, so we all said, ooh, Now, of course, that raises all sorts of interesting questions for later, because you do draw scars onto this person's body. Then all sorts of questions appear about whether there's a scar there or not. So we kind of knew that without saying, real quick, and continued. There's a process by which you specify the kind of warrior. There are several different kind of binary variables, and one of the most important is whether they are institutionally recognized, whether they are sort of a official warrior, a known, supported, promoted, supporting and promoting kind of warrior. We definitely did not pick that. And in fact, the oppositional ideology, the thing that the warrior fought against, turned out to be much more, it's basically the philosophy that the best rises to the top. So if you are at the top, this is evidence of bestness, and messing with that would be foolish because you're kind of going against the mechanisms of, the universe or something, and you, pretty much should be structuring things, or things will naturally be structured on the basis of this bestness. Let's let them do their thing, because they're the best at it, and so forth. Let's not mess that up. Well, so anyway, that was the ideology that our warrior was opposed to. And we talked also, interestingly enough, about it being very anonymous. This is not a warrior known to everybody, at least in terms of who they precisely are. All right, so we're getting kind of this interesting shadowy warrior who has a huge impact but isn't known to be who they are to everybody, and probably has an identity out there that's quite constructed by people receiving the activity. All right, we got to work on this, and various ideas occurred that were part of making the warrior. There was a symbol for the thing that she opposes, that Mala sketched up, and as we were scribbling, and we continued. All right, well, to make a long story short, because it was a pretty substantial saga, we played scenes of this person's life out of order. So the person speaking said how old they were at the time, and they would be drawing a scar or a tattoo on, and we knew what, actually, that's how you start. You actually have the pen of whichever color, and you either draw on a scar or you draw on a tattoo, and everybody's kind of looking at it, and you start talking about the situation in which this is going to happen. Sooner or later, about the point when things kind of go some way, and before the scar or tattoo happens, you pass that speaking to the person holding the other pen. The way the pens move isn't just around the table. They will move if they have to that way, but the way that they move, and the way sometimes they don't move, or one of them doesn't move, is actually pretty cool. You don't really know who that second person is going to be necessarily. At least in the long run, you don't really know how the pens are going to bounce around and who will be speaking for what. So that turns out, both by the way the pens move and in terms of, okay, now you talk, into the randomizer system for play, which is quite strong, as you'll see, or as we found out. This is a game that really has a nice mechanism for random outcomes in terms of our subjective experience of it, far more so than plenty of games I can think of with dice, where you roll dice a lot, but the consequences of the outcomes are so trivial that you're really just rattling on the table more than anything else. Well, then, where to keep from blithering indefinitely? We had kind of this near future mild dystopia happening in our fiction, and this is a neat kind of setting. We're used to, I at least am used to a lot of these being really apocalyptic. The cityscapes of the original Blade Runner movie, the cityscapes of the original RoboCop movie are very good examples. You're looking across a modern city. Most of the technology is very familiar, but it's blasted. I mean, there's like fires, blooming up from different neighborhoods, and it's wretched. There's, clearly we live in a failed society that just hasn't fallen over yet. Whereas the kind that I'm talking about and that we did here is familiar from other sources, and this is not being picked quite as iconically as the others. I'm just kind of grabbing from my thoughts at the moment, going back in time a bit, and I'm thinking of Minority Report, that film, and I'm thinking more recently of a number of kind of Netflixy shows which are again set in a future that really isn't all that different. We're not talking about space flight perhaps, but we're talking about a few different looking products or a couple of different practices that are having a huge impact, but really are tweaked just a little bit from ours. And the setting, people living in the setting think that it's normal the same way that we think ours is normal. So, and it's played very, very, very naturalistically, without, perhaps even unrealistically naturalistically, because the haircuts are pretty familiar. They're not whacked. There's not a whole lot of tagging of and now this is the future in the sense of Max Headroom or UFO. This setting became richer as we went along. We discovered that our warrior had been born into the top, and that her travails were largely matters of the price that people pay. And this was not sort of a look how those at the top suffer. It was more like how the top doesn't take care of its own, and the various class crossing interactions that she has